So how the virus actually gets into your body, or how a virus gets into your body, is via a lock and key. So it essentially opens up the door and then gets in. So blood sugar in particular, if we're going through fluctuations, if we're not eating enough, say, for instance, good quality proteins, good quality fats, and good quality cooked vegetables and sustaining our blood sugar, if we're not doing enough, the right kind of exercise, if we're not getting good sleep, if we're not eating the types of foods that stabilize our blood sugar, we can all attest to having our blood sugar like going up and down. This is our energy levels going up and down throughout the day. What happens is essentially we upregulate what's called ACE, which is an enzyme, which is like that door which allows viruses in. Okay? Where this door is in high amounts is actually in our gut. Okay? So if we've got a lot of inflammation in our gut, if our blood sugar is going up and down, essentially, what happens is we increase this production of a particular door that allows infections to get into our system. And this is also why a lot of the research initially came out about people experiencing, when they caught the virus, they were experiencing digestive symptoms a lot more than what they were upper respiratory. And this is why everyone's going out and buying the toilet paper. Have you wondered why everyone's gone out and bought toilet paper? Because initially came with, when you got contracted the infection, it came with things like diarrhea, or came with constipation, or came with loose stool, or pain, or bloating, that sort of thing. So when those initial claims came out, everyone rushed off to get toilet paper. But essentially what that gave us an indication of is how a virus actually gets into the body. And it got in via the digestive system. Okay? So maintaining this good quality blood sugar, and so keeping your inflammation down, which is part 2 of this whole situation, is ultimately going to reduce the doorways into your system. Okay? So inflammation, let's talk about that. We all know what it's like to trip over and kind of bang your elbow and you get a graze, and then it heals over after a week or 2 if you don't kind of re-injure it. Think about this going on if you scratch yourself or you damage yourself and you're continually rubbing on there. Do you think it will heal? Certainly not. Okay? This is what I mean by inflammation. And inflammation can be a good thing, but it can also be not necessarily a positive thing. Okay? So inflammation, which is kind of low and chronic and under the surface, whether or not that's from eating foods that don't necessarily agree with us. For example, if our gut health is not well, if our gut health is not working properly, then this perpetuates something which is called inflammation. Essentially, this is us rubbing on that graze and us not healing. Okay? I want you to think about, this is a good way that I kind of portray to a lot of my clients that I work with about having good gut health. Okay? So I want you to think about everything that you had for lunch today. I bet it was good. So I want you to think about all that good quality protein. I want you to think about those good cooked vegetables. I want you to think about that good quality fats that you had. And I want you to put it in, think about doing this. I don't want you to do this because it'll be gross. I want you to put it into a blender and then blending it to the consistency of minestrone soup, all chunky. And then I want you to put it into a plastic bag and throw it out into the Australian sun and leave it there for a few days, like 2-3 days. The weather's like 37, 36 degrees, same temperature as the human body. What do you think it's going to look like after a couple of days? Yeah? Fermented, bloated, probably disgusting, yeah? And if we're not digesting our food, if we're not eating the types of foods that really kind of work with our body, if we're not keeping that inflammation down, these are the types of things that take place in our gut. And these are ultimately, over time, what reduce our immunity. Okay? So just to recap, we've spoken a little bit about blood sugar. Think about our metabolism like a fire. What we want to do is we don't want to put sticks and twigs on that fire. And what I mean by that, we don't want to put like refined carbohydrates. We don't want to put sugars. We don't want to put tissue paper on our fire because it's inefficient fuel and we'll be going up and down with our blood sugar. What we want to do is put big logs, and these are our good quality proteins, these are our good quality fats, and these are our good quality diverse cooked vegetables at regular intervals, which will sustain our blood sugar throughout the day and limit those fluctuations, which are ultimately going to reduce inflammation and decrease those doors that are allowing infections into our body. The people that get the most infections are pre-diabetics, people with type 2 diabetes, and people with fluctuating blood sugar, people with chronic disease, okay? People with inflammation. So in order to be able to limit our contraction of infections, virus, bacteria, fungus, etc., we want to limit inflammation, limit blood sugar. And then thirdly rather, is blood pressure. Okay. So blood pressure in particular, they're finding, along with blood sugar, opens the door for those infections to come in. Because what happens, it's a lock and key. If our door is essentially open and if our lock is damaged, that's how the virus gets into our system ultimately, and that's how ultimately we get succumb to certain infections. So blood pressure, I want to talk about in a perspective of the stress point. And that's why I started this with, I wanted to perpetuate the idea of this is kind of an antidote to the fear that a lot of people are putting out there. If we're engaging with the news, for example, when we first wake up in the morning, then we're putting ourselves into a state of fight or flight. And if we're in a state of fight or flight where we feel like we're running away from danger, what that does is it suppresses our immune system. Okay? Our body can do a bunch of things at once, but in these specific things, if we're in that fight or flight mode, well, then what happens is the resources from our immune system go to that fight or flight. If we're looking at our phone, for example, if we're scrolling through, listening to the news, getting those updates, counting the death toll as if it's like Olympic medals, then what happens is we feel that underlying fight or flight, we put ourselves in that mode, and then we suppress our immune system. Once again, leading us to be more vulnerable to certain things. Okay? So, keeping the inflammation low, eating good quality food, limiting the processed food, limiting refined oils, eating at regular intervals, for example. This is basic stuff. Because ideally, if it is a health crisis, the greatest antidote and the greatest weapon we have, or the greatest liability, is how our health status is. And the health status is the basics. We'll get to the nutrients and we'll get to the herbs and that sort of stuff later on, but ultimately it's the basics that you do well over time that ultimately lead to the fortification of our immune system and a better resilience to make sure that we don't get infections or we don't succumb to certain things like this. Okay? So we've got our blood sugar, eating regularly, stabilizing. We've got our inflammation, which is eating good quality food, making sure our gut health's taken care of. For example, in the immune ebook that I've released for you guys, we're going to include some bone broth, some really good recipes. We're going to include some magic mushroom type of drink. And what that will do is it'll reduce the inflammation and start to heal and seal that lining. Okay? If you're experiencing things like reflux or bloating or indigestion, or you're not going to the bathroom regularly, or you eat certain foods and you get brain fog, this is the sort of stuff that we need to clean up. Because ideally, this is the types of things that over time compromises our resilience. Okay? So now we'll get on to things like nutrients, for example. So there's a lot of information getting put out, and a lot of it's pretty much unfounded. A lot of it hasn't been researched. A lot of it has very little studies to show it's actually effective. Some of the real basics and some of the things that I do in order to kind of fortify my immunity is things that you've already heard of. And this is one of the most simple ones. And I think coming into winter now, it's one of the most important things. And that's vitamin D. So this is vitamin D that we get. It's the cheapest one as well because it comes from the sun. So it comes for free. Okay. With vitamin D, the way I observe it is it's kind of like Goldilocks' porridge. We don't want too much, obviously, because we get burnt and that suppresses our immune system. And we don't want not enough. When we're getting, say, 5 to 10 minutes of really good quality sun on as much skin as possible, that's what brings our vitamin D levels up. And I would even go further to say we're coming into winter now, so I'd do somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes of good quality sunlight on as much skin as possible. And what this does is it mobilizes our white blood cells and regulates our immune system. So what happens is our white blood cells, they're the killers, as opposed to the red, which carry oxygen and nutrients. The white blood cells, what they do is they surveil around. So they kind of go around your body and they find any bacteria, virus, infection. And then what they do is they tag them, and then they'll mobilize your entire immune response onto that and then destroy it. What determines whether or not you can mount a really good immune response towards an infection, or what determines whether or not your immune response is exaggerated to the point where it actually damages your own tissue, is vitamin D. So getting 10 to 15 minutes of good quality sun during the day is going to up those vitamin D levels. And for those of you with darker skin, like olive skin or darker tans, we need to be getting more. So it's determined based on our skin's a solar panel. So based on the color of our skin determines whether or not we need more or less in order to optimize those vitamin D levels. okay? Especially doing it in the morning. So do it in the morning first thing. It regulates your circadian rhythm as well, and that will help you get into a deep sleep at nighttime. If we're getting natural light in our eyes, we're avoiding blue light. Getting into a deep sleep at nighttime is also going to mobilize your immune system and fortify it, okay? The next one's vitamin C. So there's quite a bit of research coming out in actually Wuhan, I guess you could say where it all began. And they used vitamin C, whether or not that was intravenous or ingested, to really build up that immune response. So as your white blood cells start to see an infection, what they do is as they tag it, and then they come and engulf, and also what they do is they squirt out hydrogen peroxide. And that hydrogen peroxide is essentially vitamin C. So if we don't have high levels of vitamin C, if we don't have topped up levels, if we've been drinking too much caffeine, for example, if we've recently been exposed to an infection, not having optimal vitamin C levels is super imperative to be able to fight off an infection. And humans are one of the only mammals that don't actually make their own vitamin C. So other mammals, I'll just use a random one, for example, a goat, which they've done a lot of research in. When they're exposed to stress, when they go through stress, or when they're exposed to an infection, what they do is they actually produce up to 4 to 5 grams of vitamin C themselves. So we don't have that mechanism. So what we need to be able to do is incorporate that vitamin C in our nutrition to be able to upregulate that storage, and then to be able to fight off the infections. So what I do is, considering that, at the moment I want to be on high alert, I want my resilience to be fortified, I want my immune system to be strong, I take somewhere between 1 to 3 grams a day. Anything more than that's not necessarily like you'll either pee it out or you'll be on the toilet using up your supplies of toilet paper. So what I do is I take somewhere between 1 and 3 grams. I usually just do 1 gram, 1 capsule, just take that. Also things like oranges, as we know, lemons, limes, those sort of things, really rich in vitamin C. Also sauerkraut, super rich in vitamin C. Green leafy vegetables, if they weren't green because of the chlorophyll, they'd actually be orange because of the vitamin C content in there. Super rich. So we've already spoken about vitamin D and C. They're kind of they're the ones that I kind of consistently make sure it's at the forefront of my mind in order to optimize my immune system. And the third nutrient that I'd say is probably as important as the first two is zinc. Okay, making sure that our zinc levels are optimized are also important for our immune system. Okay, zinc heals the lining of the gut. Zinc regulates that immune response. Zinc upregulates things called natural killer cells. So these are your natural killer cells that go and hunt down these infections. Okay, and even they're using zinc in America at the moment to treat some of the virus exposed people. So what you want to do with zinc: sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, Brazil nuts. These are easy to get, good quality meats, fish. All these nutrients are super easy to get. And if you're a guy in particular, we lose a lot of zinc. Okay, through probably outside of this scope to go into it, how we lose it. So what you want to do for the guys in particular, 5 to 10 milligrams, even a little bit higher of zinc. Take that in the morning after breakfast. Never take it on an empty stomach ever, because you'll puke. All right, I found out through experience. If you take zinc on an empty stomach, it'll come straight back up. Okay, so after your meals. So what we've spoken about, we've got our D, we've got our C, we've got our zinc. Those are the trifecta of the nutrients that they're my go-tos. Okay, they're the ones to cover my bases. Then you can go a little bit extra with your A's, your E's, and your K's, that sort of stuff. But if you're eating a diverse diet, you'll get a lot of those already. Okay, these are the 3 that you want to always have topped up, because ultimately when we're mounting an immune response, when we're healing our gut lining, or we want to mobilize our natural killer cells, this is the most important thing. And also from a stress response standpoint as well, vitamin D, zinc, and also C are responsible for producing dopamine, serotonin. Like, these are your feel-good hormones, producing testosterone and producing things like estrogen, or regulating progesterone ratio for the girls. Like, if you get really bad, off the topic, if you get really bad period pain, if you get stuff like that, go for your zinc, your C, and also magnesium, throw it in there, and your D. They're super important. Okay, so now after we've got the nutrients, we'll talk about the herbals. So we've talked about the basics. So ideally, getting your blood sugar right, make sure you're keeping your stress down, incorporating some rituals around that. Then also we've got the inflammation, making sure that we're keeping that. All you guys are doing exercise, you're showing up to things like this. This is going to keep that inflammation down. Okay. Then we've got the herbals. So these are the botanicals. Being sort of a naturopath, this is my background. This is one of my passions as well. But the thing is, I don't even recommend any herbals, the botanicals, until you got your foundation right, until you got your bases covered. You don't even go to the botanicals. Okay, so now I'm already assuming that you've already got those down. Now, the first one in particular, which we've all heard about, is echinacea. So echinacea in particular is really good at the first sign of infection. A lot of the research is showing that when you feel something coming on, for instance, you get that scratchy throat, or you wake up a little bit fatigued, or you get a bit brain foggy, or you get that congestion in the back of the throat or the sinuses, that's when you start to incorporate the echinacea. What I find is it works a lot better when it's included with other herbs. When you stack it with, say, vitamin C, or you stack it with zinc, then I feel like it's more effective. But echinacea in particular, what it does is it once again builds those natural killer cells, as well as we've got two arms of our immune system. We've got the Th1. This is totally in the weeds of biochemistry, but we've got Th1, which goes after things like virus, bacteria, fungus. Th2 is all your allergies. So things like sneezing and coughing and watery eyes, that sort of stuff. Certain people, or throughout our lives, we become overdeveloped in certain arms of that immune system. What echinacea does is it brings them both up. So if we're overdeveloped in allergies and all we're doing is like coughing and sneezing and watery eyes, that's not very good against an infection that's actually inside of our body. Similarly, if we're overdeveloped in, say, for instance, the virus and bacteria and fungus part of the immune system, what happens is then we're going to destroy host tissue. As we start to break down these infections, then we're going to break down our own tissue. We're going to break down our own cells. We're going to break down our own cardiovascular system. We'll break down our own gut, trying to get at the actual infection. So this is what echinacea does really nicely. Then we go on to my favorite one. My favorite one, you probably heard about it, but not a lot of people actually looking for this particular herb in particular. So it's called Andrographis. So Andrographis is one of the stars of, maybe you guys have heard about it, Armour Force. So there's a particular company that does a product called Armour Force, and Andrographis is kind of the main herb. And this is a Chinese herb. This is one that I refrain from telling a lot of people about because it's one of my favorites. And I find that they use it a little bit wrong in my opinion. Okay. It can be used when you first start to feel something come on. That's when you start to use it. And also when you're actually going through your cold or flu or you've been struck down, that's when you kind of smash it hard. You take it after meals, but when you get over the hump, when you start to feel better, that's when you stop taking it. When you start to feel like you've really got a handle on it, when you start to feel your energy levels start to rise, when you start to get the mucus dries up a little bit and the cough starts to go, that's when you stop it. Because if you continue on for after that, all the research has shown that actually the rate of which you recover actually extends out. So if you stop taking it when you get over that hump, when the cytokines or inflammation starts to come down a little bit, if you stop taking it then, you actually recover a lot faster than if you were to take it that entire way through. Okay, so that's one of my go-tos. And you can find Armour Force, look out for it, get it from a chemist, health food shop. It's available everywhere. Really good formula. There's a couple other ones out there. Generally go with the practitioner products just because the quality of them is much higher. And generally take it after food because they do come with zinc in there. You might feel a little bit unwell. So you really want to kind of take it after food. It'll feel much better. And it'll work more efficiently because you're actually absorbing it as part of your meal as opposed to just letting it go through your digestive system. Okay? And then the last one, which is a little bit contentious, is medicinal mushrooms. So medicinal mushrooms or culinary mushrooms are incredibly good for the immune system. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So with enoki mushrooms in particular, they found that a region in China had a 30% lower cancer rate than the rest of China. So they're like, all right, we'll send in some researchers. Let's go find out why these guys have it. So the national average was X, and then they found that a specific region was actually 30% lower than the rest of the region. So they're like, send in the researchers, as they do, for instance, the blue zones where people are living to 100. They send in the researchers and they kind of look at, what are they doing different? Diet, lifestyle. Do they live near a particular area that's toxic or can potentially contaminate them? So what they found out is the people in the area in particular are enoki farmers. So what they do is they farm enoki mushrooms, and as they put the mushrooms together, they pick the mushrooms and they put them together. All the damaged mushrooms, because you can't sell damaged mushrooms, you want it to be nice and schmick and not, bruised in any way. All the bruised and damaged mushrooms, what they do is all the workers would take them home and feed them for their family. So what they found, I think it was somewhere between 1 to 10% of their total diet was actually included enoki mushrooms. And that just shows how powerful it is at improving and regulating your immune system to go mop up things like cancer cells, because all cancer cells are is your immune system suppressed over time. This is contentious. Your immune system suppressed over time, where you can't go and mop up those debris, deformed, irregular, misshaped cells. So they found that what these enoki mushrooms do, and you can get them from, say, for instance, Harris Farm. You'll find them, they're little tentacle ones. Get them from Harris Farm, or even they you can get it from Harris Farm, or, for example, things like turkey tails or button mushrooms, or all of those ones that have a very similar activity. They improve the immune system's ability to mop up virus, infection, debris, and clear those out of the system. Okay, so what you could do is you could either just include those in your cooking. Generally, I include those at breakfast, or I include those with dinner. If I make sort of like sausages, or if I make some meat, or if I cook some fish, I'll just include whatever mushrooms I've got available. I'll put them on there. Olive oil, fresh herbs and spices, beautiful. And that under the surface will be improving your immune system to be able to surveil and kind of pick off anything that you've got there. Okay? So then we've got our herbs, we've got our nutrients, we've got our D, getting regular sun. We've got our C that we can get from citrus, green leafy vegetables, we can get from supplementing, which is all going to support that immune system and start healing down that debris. We've got the zinc, healing the gut lining, mobilizing that immune response, regulating that virus, bacteria, fungus part of the immune system, and bringing down that allergic response. Then we've got our echinacea, which we take at the start of an infection. If you feel something coming on, that's when you hit the echinacea. Okay, don't wait till you're already in the thick of it and you're experiencing a box of tissues and you run out of tissues using toilet paper. That's not the time to go for it. You got to go for it straight away when you feel something coming on. Then we got the andrographis, which we take at the start. We go hard with that, and then once you feel that you're over the hump, that you've kind of starting to get better, that's when you stop. Okay, that's when you stop and you feel like you power through it, because that shuts down your immune. You've used your immune system; it's been effective at getting you out of it, and then you shut it down and then move on from there. Okay. Then we've got our medicinal mushrooms that you can include in your foods, you can include in your meals, and then also if you want to go over and beyond, you can go into a health food shop and get things like cordyceps mushrooms, which is actually a specific supplement which has really got a good affinity for the lungs. Things like chaga. What I do is sometimes I get the powders and I include them in my coffee, or I make a drink out of it, and then drink those. Really good for fortifying that immune system. If you find that you're getting colds and flus or sinus infections, ear infections, those sort of things, if you're taking antibiotics more than 2 to 3 times a year, medicinal mushrooms are super important for that. And they have a nice activity over time. You'll notice a lift in your energy. You'll notice a lift in your mood, for example. You'll notice even chaga regulates your blood sugar, one of the factors that I talked about inhibiting viruses from coming into our system. And one of the other things that the mushrooms do really nicely is certain infections, particularly RNA-based viruses, what they do, which is kind of the one that's out there, what they do is they hide within our immune cells. So they hide within our white blood cells, okay? And they disguise themselves so our own immune system can't actually see them. So what the mushrooms do is they go around and find out which of the cells actually contain an infection, and then they tag it. So they tag the cells that have got an infection, and they're actually like in stealth mode, so they're hidden. That's the reason why we often can't mount a good immune response to them, because actually stealth. So the mushrooms go and tag those, and then the immune system goes, oh, there's an infection in there. All right, let's consume that, break it down, and then get it out of the system. Okay. So those are my they're my 3 go-to kind of classifications of herbs that I use quite a lot. In fact, a little bit of a case study that I had. I worked with a lady. She was a swimmer in her mid-30s, and she was frequently getting sick. She was on antibiotics. This might sound crazy, but she was on antibiotics somewhere between 8 and 12 times a year, pretty much every month, sometimes even more often than that. And she was a swimmer, getting infections in her ear, getting infections in her nose, constantly getting flus and colds, and she had costochondritis, which is where if you get an infection, then you get like a flare-up of the cartilage in the middle of your chest because you're coughing that much. So we did a little bit of a workup, did her history, eating relatively good, I would say, but all pretty much throughout the entire history, all we could find was a little bit of bloating and loose stool. So a little bit of diarrhea maybe once or twice a week, okay? Random, couldn't pinpoint exactly what contributed to it. So what we did is we did some testing, did some stool testing, had a little look deeper, looked at the microbiome, so the gut bacteria. She turned out having actually a parasite. So just because we live in a a developed country doesn't necessarily mean that we can't be exposed to parasites. She had a parasite which actually suppresses her immune system. So this parasite lives in the small intestine, and what it does is it distracts your immune system because your immune system has to fight off this parasite. So then she was constantly getting infections in other areas. So once doing this test, we looked at how strategies in order to be able to get rid of the parasite, incorporated obviously whole foods, removing the sugar, removing the kind of processed food, which allowed her gut lining to heal. 70% of our immune system is actually in our gut. So if there's anywhere you want to support your immune system, make sure that you're supporting your gut health. Okay, that's the most important. So for her, we found that she had a parasite. We incorporated some antimicrobial herbs, removed the parasite, strengthened up her gut lining, really switched her immune system back on via the gut. And then that improved her resilience versus infections that she was getting in the back of the throat, improved her infections that she was getting in her lung from her gut. From removing the infection in her gut, that's how much of a difference it made. I've been seeing her I'd say we've been working together for almost a year and a half now. And I would say that she hasn't had antibiotics since the time that we've been working together. So pretty much in that entire time, it took around 2 to 3 months in order to really get down in the weeds and to discover what she had. But then once we got rid of it, got rid of the infection, then obviously the other infections that she had pretty much cleared up almost instantaneously. Obviously we've got the zinc in there, we've got the vitamin C, and strengthen up her D in order to be able to fortify our immune system. So that's a really good kind of a snapshot, a really good case of how taking care of your gut health and something that doesn't seem necessarily linked to your immunity makes a big difference from your ability to fight off infections, for your ability to actually fortify that resilience and withstand certain triggers that can come into our system. Okay? So that kind of summarizes what we've done is we've covered the 3 pillars, the blood sugar, the inflammation, and the blood pressure. We've covered some key nutrients that we want to have as our baseline. That's kind of our insurance policy. Then in the unlikely event that we get sick or we're exposed to an infection, because moving into winter, there's going to be a lot more infections. We're closer together. We all harbor infections all the time. It kind of sounds gross. We all have things like influenza A. We all have things like influenza B. We all have things like strep or staph infections that are underlying, that are kind of living synergistically and almost like alongside our physiology. And when we start to get run down, when our mucous membranes and our immune system gets a little bit drier, that's when those things can start to flare up. So making sure that we're doing the basics, which is pretty much what I've spoken about this whole time. Health status is one of the most important things during this health crisis. And it doesn't necessarily need to be fancy. You don't necessarily need to be doing anything kind of biohacky or anything like that's unresearched. It can be the real basics that make the difference. Okay, so I invite you to not only engage in them yourselves, but if there's family or loved ones that you know that are either have chronic diseases or they're taking medication or they're frequently getting sick or their immune system's compromised, have a little chat to them, explain to them, these are the types of things that are going to make a difference. Eating anti-inflammatory foods. Are you stabilizing your blood sugar? How do you feel at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Are you getting those dips? Are you craving sugar after meals? These are the types of things that are like the cryptic little clues that give us an indication that our immunity is compromised. It's not necessarily that we just get an infection or we've got sinus issues that our immune system's compromised. That's not the case at all. Often the case of our immune system being suppressed is very intertwined with these symptoms, for example, fatigue or brain fog or bloating and loose stool, those sort of things. These are better indications of how our immune system is, as opposed to just getting a cold and flu every now and then. Okay? So I invite you to share this information. And now that you guys are fully equipped with these tools, I want you guys to go out there and implement them, because we got a bit of a choice here. We could choose to use this time and be in fear and to stay up to date, like I mentioned before, stay up to date with like the death toll and the tally, like it's a Olympic medal tally. Or we can use this time to really put our health first and to fortify our resilience and to come out of this inevitably much stronger than what we went in. A lot of you guys, considering that you're continuing with your gym training, you're continuing with the workouts, the guys at Code 5 are doing an amazing job of following along with on the Facebook page. This is tremendous that they've all band together. And part of that process in order to reduce the stress response, to fortify our immune system, is having that community around. So I want to close with this. So before I open it up to questions. So in the there's clusters around the world called the centenarians, and I alluded to this before. People that live to over 100, consistently over 100. And what they did is they went around similar to the Enoki farmers, and they studied like their nutrition, they studied their lifestyle, they studied the type of exercise they do. And what they found is it's relatively the same throughout the modern world. Like they eat relatively the same. They exercise relatively the same as we do. The only thing that's different is they found that the majority of people, multiple generations live in the same house. Multiple generations get together. I know it's very challenging with isolation, but I guess we can do this by reaching out to people, our loved ones, staying in a community like this with Code 5, really connecting with the people around you, really connecting with people via the internet, and kind of just checking in on how they are. So with the centenarians, they found that the majority of them will get together and either they play cards or they speak on the phone or they, talk with their family or loved ones very regularly, much more than what the Western world does. So maintaining, obviously, to live to 100, they're going to be able to, their immune system's going to be strong enough to fight off an infection or two. And part of that immunity is communicating with your tribe, essentially, communicating with those people that are your loved ones. That has almost a higher impact on your immune resilience than what a lot of the nutrition, a lot of the nutrients, and a lot of the herbal medicine has. So I invite you to go a little bit further than what we already have. I know that, during this time, it's been a bit of an adaptation period, a bit of a transformative period for us to get to know our new routines. But after we've got the basics down, after we've got our nutrition, after we've got our supplementation and our nutrients down, I invite you to just reach out to the people that you love and the people that you care about the most, and really connecting with them, because they're going to need it more than ever at the moment. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. I really want to thank you for being here. What I want to do is I want to open up the floor for some questions, if you'd like. I've shared quite a lot. Some of it you might want me to clarify, some of it you might not. I really thank you guys for being here. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you're more than welcome to send them through. And I'll go to a couple. Nothing's off the table. If you want to go into anything that we haven't spoken about, if you want to talk about reflux, if you want to talk about sleep, if you want to talk about something that I may not even mentioned, if you've got some toenail fungus that you haven't been able to address, I'll go into it if you like. Okay, so now I open up the floor for you guys, and if you'd like to ask something, you're more than welcome. Okay? All right. Unreal. Okay. There we go. So we got our first. Thanks, Megan, for asking that question. So sleep in particular, it's a big topic. It's hard to cover, okay? But we'll go into it, especially around this time. I would say keeping it basic, keeping it real basic, okay? So what I mean by basic is limiting your exposure, like basic heat, sleep hygiene stuff, especially around screens at nighttime. I know that we're on the computer now at the moment. Things like looking at your screen or scrolling through Facebook or social media, for example. Exposure to that blue light at night, what that does is it suppresses your sleep hormones, okay? Suppressing your sleep hormones in particular, especially at nighttime. And the reason why is that blue mimics 12 o'clock sun. So remember, think about how you feel at 12 o'clock during the day. You feel alive, hopefully you feel alive and energized and focused and concentrated, that sort of stuff. That's because the light signals to us that it's daytime. So it upregulates our hormonal processes, liberates our energy. At nighttime, if we're signaling to our brain that it's 12 o'clock in the day at nighttime, then how do you think we're going to feel? We're going to upregulate all those energy pathways. We're going to increase our cognitive function. We're going to start to overstimulate us. So some of the most important things are those basic sleep hygiene things: limiting blue light, getting a warm shower at nighttime. That'll bring down your core temperature. Things like chamomile tea, very basic. Things like magnesium, Epsom salt baths. This is what will keep us consistently at sleep, in that deep, nice, restful sleep. Also, things like stabilizing your blood sugar, something that I spoke about right at the start. If your blood sugar is a mess, if your blood sugar is up and down throughout the day, if you can't go long periods of time without food, and you feel like your brain's coming, like your cognitive function's coming down, or you feel like jittery or shaky or that sort of stuff if you go for food without food for long periods of time, how do you think you're going to feel at nighttime? That's the longest period of time that we go with no food. You're going to feel shaky, you're going to feel jittery, and what that does is it activates the stress response, adrenaline gets squirted out, and that wakes you up. So what happens is you go to bed perfectly from dinner, drop down, low blood sugar, kicks you up, drop down again. So stabilizing our blood sugar through the day with those good quality proteins, carbohydrates, and cooked vegetables and good quality fats at regular intervals through the day, that'll keep you going, okay? And also maintaining, obviously bringing the inflammation down is going to make a big difference to that. All right. Ooh, a contentious question. We'll address it. So protein shakes in particular, questions come through. What are my thoughts on protein shakes? I think it's a supplement, and supplement is an addition to food, okay? Provided that we're having our good quality nutrition from our whole foods, provided that we're getting quality, well then ideally what we can do is we can incorporate protein shakes as an addition to that. If we find that we're relying on protein shakes to get all our protein from, what you'll find is you'll start to get symptoms. You'll start to get brain foggy. You'll start to get bloated. You might even start to get even more thirsty because you got to break down that protein that you're being exposed to. Also, what happens is with protein shakes, it doesn't necessarily come with a lot of the nutrition that you get from normal food. For example, a lot of protein shakes don't contain things like zinc, which you find in fish, or which you find in meats, or which you find in like lamb or eggs, those sort of things. These foods contain a lot more nutrition, even things like selenium, things like vitamin C, even steaks contain a lot of vitamin C, things like your magnesium and your selenium, which are responsible for your detox pathways. All of getting good quality nutrition ultimately will go a long way because it actually contains a lot more nutrition than what the protein shakes itself. So if you find that you're not meeting your protein targets with just nutrition on its own, and you really want to build that extra muscle, then incorporating protein shakes can sometimes be essential. If you're incorporating the protein shakes, often combine it into a smoothie. If it still fits with your macros, combine it with a smoothie. Add a tablespoon of almond butter to it. Add berries to it. Add some green leafy vegetables. Chop up half a zucchini, a frozen zucchini, and throw it in the blender and make it into a meal. Okay, that way you're getting that nutrition. Okay, so as a supplement, how many mushrooms should I have? That's interesting. So generally depends. So what I do is I generally get 1 or 2 different types, chop them up. I'm pretty basic. So with my cooking, that's rich coming from a nutritionist, yeah? So I chop up 4 to 5 different vegetables, and I'll chop up 2 to 3 different mushrooms. Maybe a handful of mushrooms, just chuck that in. A handful of mushrooms 3 to 4 times a week is enough to increase your immune system's function. Definitely. Mushrooms are very, very potent, incredibly potent, actually. Okay? So that kind of covers that. If you're including like the medicinal mushrooms, like the chagas and the cordyceps, that sort of stuff, then you can include a couple of teaspoons in your coffee, or a couple of teaspoons in a matcha tea, a couple of teaspoons in a hot chocolate, and that would be enough. Okay? Mix them up. It's good to get diversity. Diversity is the most important thing. Don't just rely on one. Try to get a few different ones, because each of those specific mushrooms contains a totally different nutrition profile. So what we want to do is we want to cover as much basis as possible by getting a diverse array of foods as possible. Okay? I hope that addresses that. Okay? Okay. Now we've got, are amino acids and protein as important or more important than vitamin C for immunity? Yes and no. Okay? And the reason why is because all of your immune cells, all of your structures in your body are actually made of protein. And what I see commonly, I wouldn't say too commonly, I don't want to put anyone under the bus, but what I find in particular is that those that have been not eating enough protein, for example, people that are relying on processed carbohydrates a lot, what I find is in their blood test, I find very low albumin. And albumin is a marker of protein absorption. And often when you see that, they've got low immunity, because that's one of the major signaling molecules and one of the major antioxidant pathways that we have in order to protect our immune system. So I would say protein and amino acids are probably more important, if not as important. And the reason why is because it's a macronutrient. So if your blood sugar is not stable, if you're not getting enough protein in order to build those structures, build those immune cells, if you're not building the machinery that you need in order to build to have your immune system, then the vitamin C is not going to make a difference. Okay, so making sure that we actually have those immune mechanisms there, then the vitamin C is used by those mechanisms in order to be able to carry out its essentially its role to fight off virus infection, to mitigate oxidative stress, and to buffer inflammation. Okay, that covers that. Okay, so where would be the awesome? So where would be the best place to access the information that I've spoken about? So I've written a little bit of an ebook for you guys, and I'm gonna send that out to you as well. Connor's releasing that to you. I've put everything that I've spoken about. I've put all the nutrition. I've put all the nutrients. I've put together a day in the life of pretty much what I've done. I thought about this when we came into this situation. I'm like, all right, considering that I've been working in this industry for almost 10 years now, considering I've been working, just because I know the information doesn't necessarily make me immune to contracting an infection. It's time to put together a plan for myself and also my family members, because my mum's got asthma. And I thought about her. She's got a chronic disease. So what can I do to fortify her resilience, because she's in one of the more vulnerable states, essentially. So I'm going to release that to you guys. If you want to go a little bit deeper in particular, if you type in any topic, for example, vitamin C, and then you put the words PubMed after it, PubMed, published medical journals. And what that'll bring up is it'll bring up all the way things function. It'll bring up double-blind control studies. It'll bring up research, because sometimes out there, a lot of the information that's perpetuated isn't necessarily backed up by research. So ideally, to know whether or not actually it does what it says it does, it's ideally we want to be able to do trials on it. So if you want to write vitamin C, if you want to write medicinal mushrooms or cordyceps or chaga or anything that I've spoken about, flick it into PubMed. And then you'll be able to find or bring up a plethora of studies, and you can kind of flick through that. If you want some lighter reading, for example, then the ebook is probably better off, okay? Because that could be some dense reading within itself, okay? There you go. So I think we've covered it all. Thank you guys for asking the questions. I had a lot of fun. And thank you guys for being here with me today. I hope you found value from this, okay? So I just want to say keep on. I'm assuming that you're already doing your training. You're already taking care of yourself. So hang in there. You're doing well. And implement some of the strategies. Play around with some of the information that I've said. Once you get the ebook, go through it. Kind of put those into your strategies, put those into your routines, engage with, see what it's like to listen to the news after lunch as opposed to listening to it first thing in the morning. Okay, see if that makes a difference to the way you feel. Okay, and then if anyone in particular wants to go a little bit deeper, if you've had immune system issues in the past, if you're struggling with your blood sugar, if you've got a little bit of inflammation that you want to manage, I pretty much transitioned my clinic online like most of us have. So you're more than welcome to reach out. I'd be happy and elated to work with you, as I have with the majority of the people that I work with from Code 5. Okay? So I wish you strength, and inevitably when we get out of this, we'll be much stronger because of it. Okay? So thank you guys. Much love, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Okay? Ciao.